Right then, let's jump right into it. Today, we're going to be examining the careers of two prominent figures in Latin American security. We have Genaro Garcia Luna, Mexico's former Secretary of Public Security, and Patricia Bullrich, who held the same position, but in Argentina. What's really striking is that both of their careers kind of ended, well, under a cloud of suspicion. And this raises some really important questions, about the war on drugs, about corruption. Our main source for this deep dive is an article by Juan Masuinity, published in OK News.
Ah, okay,
Yeah,
news.
it's
Yeah.
based right in the heart of Madrid, on the Calle Gran Via.
Fantastic publication.
Yeah, really in-depth reporting, and this piece by Soinity is no exception. He really digs deep and highlights some pretty disturbing parallels between these two figures.
Right. Yes, it is quite remarkable when you look at these two individuals. They operated in completely different contexts, completely different countries, yet their paths, their careers, they share these uncanny similarities. It's really quite striking, and they both rose to the very top of their respective security apparatuses. They both enjoyed quite a bit of support from the United States, and both are now facing these accusations of serious misconduct,
Yeah.
including this potential collaboration with the very criminal organizations that they were tasked with dismantling.
Yeah, and that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. Right? Are we looking at two isolated cases,
Yeah.
or is there something bigger, something more systemic going on here? Is this kind of indicative of a wider problem with corruption within Latin American security forces? And if so, what role did the U.S. play in all of this? Well, those are the million-dollar questions, aren't they? And
Yeah.
to really understand the scope of this, we need to delve into each of these cases, in detail. Let's start with Genaro Garcia Luna. What's interesting here is that his early career path, if you look back, it doesn't exactly scream future drug czar.
No, not at all.
He actually studied electronics engineering at the National Polytechnic Institute in Mexico City.
Yeah, I mean that's a far cry from the world of drug cartels and high stakes sting operations. So how does an electronics engineer end up as the top cop in a country that's completely embroiled in a brutal drug war? Right. Well, it seems that despite his academic background, Garcia Luna's ambitions, they lay elsewhere. He very quickly pivoted toward law enforcement. He, rose through the ranks, and ultimately he became a key figure in the Federal Investigation Agency, better known as the AFI, and this was really his springboard to becoming Secretary of Public Security under President Felipe Calderon, which placed him right at the heart of Mexico's fight against these cartels.
And this is where things take a pretty dramatic turn, right? I mean, this is a man who is hailed as a champion in the war on drugs. Someone who worked very closely with U.S. agencies, and then to be convicted in the U.S. court, no less.
Yeah.
And sentenced to decades in prison for colluding with the very same cartels he was supposed to be fighting. I mean, that's a spectacular fall from grace.
It really is. It's quite a stunning turn of events. And what's particularly interesting is that, these rumors, these whispers about Garcia Luna's ties to these criminal organizations, they've been circulating for years before his arrest.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Soinati's article, he digs into a very specific, compelling example, the case of Florence Cassé,
Okay.
a French citizen who was arrested in Mexico in 2005 and accused of being part of a kidnapping gang.
Oh, yes, the Florence Cassé's case, right. This one grabbed international headlines,
It did.
caused a huge diplomatic row between France and Mexico.
Huge, yeah. Now, what makes this case so relevant to our discussion is Garcia Luna's his involvement. He was the head of the AFI at the time, and he orchestrated this televised raid of Cassé's ranch and presented it as this dramatic live capture.
Oh, wow.
But it turns out the whole thing it was staged
Oh, really?
for the cameras. Cassé and her partner had actually been arrested the day before.
So he was essentially manipulating the situation.
Yeah.
To create this spectacle, to project this image of himself as this decisive and effective leader. It seems that image, that perception, played a really crucial role in his approach.
Absolutely. And as the Casais case unraveled, and revealed all these inconsistencies and raised these serious doubts about the evidence against her, it really cast a long shadow over Garcia Luna's tactics and the legitimacy of his entire war on drugs approach. It
Right.
exposed this willingness to manipulate information to stage manage these events for public consumption.
Yeah.
And it's a pattern. It's a pattern that we're going to see echoed rather disturbingly in Patricia Bullrich's story as well.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But we'll delve into that a little bit later. First, let's unpack Bullrich's background, which is perhaps even more surprising.
Mhm.
Starting with her early involvement with the Montoneros.
The Montoneros. Now, for those who might not be familiar, they were a Peronist guerrilla organization,
Hmm.
active in Argentina during the 1970s,
Yeah.
known for their left-wing ideology and their involvement in armed struggle against the government. It's quite a contrast to Bullrich's later persona as you know, this staunch advocate for law and order.
It really is. Her past it adds this really fascinating layer of complexity to her story.
Yeah.
She went from this radical, this left-wing activist, allegedly involved in kidnappings and attacks during that period to this conservative figure, someone who is deeply entrenched within Argentina's security apparatus.
So how did this dramatic ideological shift happen?
Well, that's a very complex question, and there are no easy answers, really. But what we do know is that Bullrich, she embraced this right-wing stance, and she became the Minister of Security under President Mauricio Macri. And during her tenure, she developed a very, very close relationship with the U.S. Embassy, and she adopted this very hardline stance on crime. And this often drew criticism for her heavy-handed
But
tactics.
just like Garcia Luna, her career ended up mired in these accusations of wrongdoing.
Hmm.
Soinati's article, it details allegations of falsified reports, of exaggerated incidents, and a potential disregard for due process in her pursuit of these security objectives.
Yeah, there's this one particularly striking example. I have to admit, this one is it's a bit hard to believe, but it involves Bullrich mistaking talcum powder for cocaine.
What?
Yeah, and this led to the wrongful arrest and imprisonment of an individual. A blunder that really calls into question her competence and judgment.
Wow. I mean, that's shocking. It does make you wonder if this was a genuine mistake or a deliberate attempt to manipulate information to bolster a particular narrative.
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And it's not an isolated incident either. Soinati's piece highlights this pattern of potentially fabricated reports and these exaggerated threats that were used to kind of justify Bullrich's hardline policies and
Yeah.
to silence any opposition.
So we're starting to see these clear parallels emerge,
Right.
both in terms of their alleged actions and the potential motivations behind them. But before we dive into those comparisons, I think it's crucial to understand the context in which these individuals they operated, particularly the U.S.'s role in the war on drugs in Latin America.
Oh, absolutely. The U.S.'s role is key here. Both Garcia Luna and Bullrich, they enjoyed significant support from the United States throughout their careers. The U.S. was a key ally in the fight against drug trafficking in both Mexico and Argentina, providing funding, providing training, and sharing intelligence.
And this is where things get really complicated, right?
Well,
Because if the accusations against these individuals are true, it raises some pretty uncomfortable questions about the U.S.'s role in all of this.
hmm
Were they aware of the potential corruption within these security apparatuses? And if so, did they just, did they turn a blind eye to it?
Yeah, that's a question that we're going to have to really grapple with as we kind of delve deeper into this tangled web. Because
Yeah.
Soinati's reporting, it suggests that the U.S., they might have known more than they let on, and their involvement in this whole saga might be far more intricate and troubling than it initially appears. But we'll unpack that more in our next segment.
Welcome back to our deep dive into these two really complex, intertwined stories. We've laid out the backgrounds of both Genaro Garcia Luna and Patricia Bullrich, and now it's time to connect the dots. What are the key parallels that emerge when we examine their careers, side by side?
Juana Masonati, our journalist from OK News,
Right.
His article does a fantastic job of outlining these similarities, and they're quite chilling when you really look at them. Firstly, we see this very clear pattern of manipulating information and staging events to bolster their public image
Mm.
and justify their actions. We've already talked about the staged arrest of Florence Cassese.
Right, right. That was orchestrated by Garcia Luna.
Exactly. Yeah.
A very blatant attempt to create a spectacle and,
Yeah.
and project this image of strength and decisiveness. It really does make you wonder how much of their war on drugs was genuine crime fighting and how much was carefully crafted performance.
Yeah, that's the key question. And with Bullrich, we see similar tactics, albeit perhaps a bit more subtly. We talked about the talcum powder incident earlier.
Right.
Whether that was a genuine blunder or a deliberate fabrication, it served to really bolster her narrative of, a country under threat and justify her hardline security policies.
Yeah, it's almost like a page straight out of the authoritarian playbook. Create a sense of fear and then present yourself as the only one who can protect the public.
Precisely. And this leads us to the second parallel, which is perhaps even more disturbing: the potential collaboration with these criminal organizations while claiming to be fighting them.
Yeah, and Garcia Luna's conviction, for working with the Sinaloa cartel, that's a pretty stark example of that, right? I mean, he was literally in bed with the very criminals that he was supposed to be taking down. But what about Bullrich? Are there any concrete examples of her involvement in similar activities?
Well, while there isn't a definitive conviction like we have in Garcia Luna's case,
Right.
Soineti's reporting does point to some troubling connections.
Okay.
There are allegations of her potential ties to drug trafficking and of protecting security forces that were involved in criminal activities.
So it's more a case of smoke and mirrors, really, isn't it? A lack of transparency that makes it very difficult to discern her true motives and actions.
That's right. And it raises the question: was she truly committed to fighting crime, or were her actions driven by these other more sinister agendas?
It's a good question, and this lack of transparency and this potential for abuse of power, it also brings us to our next parallel. The use of excessive force and disregard for human rights in the name of security.
Yeah, both Garcia Luna and Bullrich, they've been accused of employing these heavy-handed tactics, often with tragic consequences. Under Garcia Luna's leadership, the Mexican security forces, they were accused of widespread human rights abuses, of extrajudicial killings, and really operating with this sense of impunity.
And we see similar accusations leveled against Bullrich, don't we? Particularly in her handling of protests and social unrest.
Right.
Soinati's article mentions a couple of specific cases, like the death of Santiago Maldonado. He was an activist who disappeared during a protest and was later found dead.
Right.
And then there's the killing of Rafael Nahal, a young indigenous man who was killed during a police operation. These incidents, they raise serious questions about the proportionality of the force that was used and the lack of accountability for those who are responsible. It seems that both Garcia Luna and Bullrich, despite their vastly different backgrounds, they shared a similar approach to maintaining order: silence dissent, crush opposition, regardless of the cost.
It's a chilling reminder that the pursuit of security, when unchecked by ethical considerations and the rule of law, it can easily morph into something far more sinister and dangerous.
Yeah. Now, the fourth parallel that we've identified is the fabrication of cases and false accusations to maintain this facade of effectiveness and control.
We already touched upon the staged arrest of Florence Cassese, but there are other perhaps less publicized instances where both figures have been accused of using fabricated evidence and trumped up charges to target perceived enemies and create this illusion of progress in their fight against crime.
It's a classic tactic used by those in power to consolidate their control and silence dissent.
Right.
By manufacturing threats and creating a climate of fear, they can justify their authoritarian measures and deflect attention from their own potential wrongdoing.
Precisely. And finally, we come to the fifth and perhaps the most intriguing parallel. enjoying impunity and receiving external support despite these very credible accusations.
All right, and this is where the international dimension of this whole story really comes into focus, particularly the role of the United States.
Yes, absolutely. Both Garcia Luna and Bullrich, despite facing numerous allegations, and these whispers of corruption throughout their careers, they managed to maintain their positions and even garner international support. The U.S., as we've discussed, is a key ally in the war on drugs in both Mexico and Argentina, providing substantial financial and logistical support.
And if U.S. agencies were aware of the potential corruption, within these individual circles, it raises some really troubling questions about their motives and priorities.
Yeah.
Were they willing to just turn a blind eye to achieve their own strategic objectives?
That's a question that we're going to delve into further in our final segment, because Sonati's article it suggests that the U.S. may have been complicit in enabling this pattern of behavior, either through deliberate ignorance or a conscious decision to prioritize their own interests over accountability and justice.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive into the rather unsettling parallels between the careers of Gennaro Garcia Luna and Patricia Bullrich. We've really spent some time uncovering this pattern of alleged corruption and abuse of power, and this potential collusion that stretches across borders.
Wow.
Now it's time to kind of grapple with the wider implications of this complex story. What does this all mean for the countries involved, and how does it impact the global fight against organized crime?
Well, the damage caused by these scandals is really quite profound and multifaceted. On a national level, public trust in institutions, particularly those that are responsible for law enforcement and security, I mean, that has been severely eroded.
Yeah.
When those in power are seen as corrupt or complicit with criminal elements, it really undermines the legitimacy of the entire system.
It breeds this sense of cynicism, this disillusionment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes people question whether justice can truly be served, and it also fuels social unrest and instability as citizens lose faith in their leaders and the rule of law.
Precisely. And these ramifications, they extend far beyond, national borders. These cases raise serious questions about the effectiveness and the ethics of international cooperation in combating transnational crime. The U.S. in particular faces scrutiny for its role in supporting figures like Garcia Luna and Bullrich, despite these warning signs of corruption.
Yeah, so Andy's article specifically mentions the case of the U.S. undercover agent, who was betrayed and left vulnerable after providing information about Bullrich's potential illicit activities. And if this is true, it suggests a really disturbing level of complicity, or at the very least a willingness to turn a blind eye to these unsavory practices to achieve those strategic objectives.
Yeah, and it begs the question, are these international partnerships, in the fight against organized crime, are they truly genuine collaborations, or are they often driven by self-interest and a willingness to just overlook these unsavory practices as long as they serve a larger agenda?
It's a sobering thought, and it leads us to this really critical question that's been simmering beneath the surface of our entire discussion. Is the war on drugs, as it's been waged for decades now, is it actually doing more harm than good?
That's a debate that needs to happen on a global scale. By focusing so much on prohibition and militarization, we've created this incredibly lucrative black market.
Yeah.
We've empowered criminal organizations, and often we've trampled on human rights in the process. And these cases, they really highlight how individuals in positions of power, whether it's in Mexico, Argentina, or even the U.S., they've exploited this system for their own personal gain.
So what can be done? What can be done to break this cycle of corruption and impunity? What are the actionable steps that could lead to a more effective and a more ethical approach to combating organized crime?
Well, it's a complex issue. There are no easy answers, but there are certainly measures that could be taken. Strengthening independent oversight mechanisms within security agencies, that's crucial. promoting transparency and accountability, making sure that those in power are held responsible for their actions, and fostering this culture of ethical conduct, within law enforcement, really
Really.
emphasizing the importance of integrity and respect for human rights. That's essential.
And perhaps most importantly, we need to have an honest and open conversation about the war on drugs itself.
Yeah.
Is this approach with its focus on criminalization and punishment, I mean, is it truly effective? Or is it time to consider alternative approaches, such as, decriminalization, harm reduction, investing in public health and social programs that address the root causes of drug use and trafficking?
Absolutely. These cases serve as this stark reminder that simplistic solutions, they often lead to unintended consequences. We need to move beyond the rhetoric of tough on crime and acknowledge the human cost of these policies.
Yeah. The stories of Garcia Luna and Patricia Bullrich, they're ultimately cautionary tales, aren't they? They remind us that power, even when it's wielded in the name of security and justice, it can be easily corrupted. And they underscore the urgent need for greater transparency, for accountability, and a fundamental shift in how we approach this complex challenge of organized crime.
And that's perhaps the most important takeaway for our listeners today. As citizens, we have this responsibility, this duty to demand better from our leaders and the institutions that are meant to serve and protect us. We must be vigilant in holding those in power accountable, pushing for reforms and advocating for a more just and equitable world.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We encourage you to continue exploring these issues, seeking out diverse perspectives and engaging in constructive dialogue about how we can create a safer and a more just world for everyone.
Yeah.